Tell me if this has happened to you before. You're thinking about using Java, you're like, well, I heard about it. I've looked into it. It looks kind of neat. I'm going to go to Reddit and I'm going to post a thread on a programming subreddit and ask the question, what do you guys think about, what do y'all think about going into and using Java, whatever? And somebody invariably says, Java, that's junk. Don't use Java. I mean, come on. Gosh, that's from the 90s. Nobody wants that. Okay. Don't do that. Or maybe you're thinking about JavaScript or Node.js, some neat stuff. There's a lot of action there. There's no denying that. There's a new toolkit every week coming out in JavaScript. It's a happen and play. So you're like, I'm going to start digging in. It looks neat. You look at the documentation. It looks alluring to you. So you post on Twitter, X, whatever. You say, I'm thinking about going in and doing some Node.js. What do you think about that? And somebody says, don't waste your time. That platform's junk. You need to go do something else. It seems like anytime we go looking for maybe a little validation of, I'm checking this out. I want to make something out of this. I have fun doing coding. I want to I like this. I want this to be my career. I want to go do this. And you're going and asking for feedback. Is this a good investment? You've kind of tiptoed into the shallow edge of the pool, trying it out. You like the technology. And so you want a little validation that this is not some waste of time to go into this. So what should you do? And somebody invariably says, that's the wrong technology. You need to use what I've been using for years. I've used Spring for years. I've coded in Java, or somebody else is like, I've used original Java. I don't use those toolkits. I don't use frameworks. Do it the real way. Do it the way they did it in the, you know, it, native or vanilla JavaScript. I don't know, vanilla's got a bad ring to it. Use native JavaScript. It's your best bet. Or another thing is, don't use server-side templates. Use native apps on the stuff. It seems like no matter where we go, there are some strong opinions out there. Welcome to the pro coder community, a land full of people with strong opinions. And part of the discovery, the emergence is discovery. There's some strong, hefty opinions out there. So I appreciate you coming on to the show here. Find out what's my opinion on that. And let me pivot here. I got something. All right. I recently wrote an article over on my Medium site, which you can go find at the procoderio.medium.com. And basically, my opinion is that as a pro coder, it is always valuable to collect skills, to be acquiring talents, devices. It's something. Part of this kind of emerged in the inaugural relaunch of this show, and I had Mark Heckler on here about a month ago, and we talked about, and one of the things Mark said in that I thought was rather profound is that it's always okay to invest in yourself, to invest time and effort into yourself, to grow your own knowledge set. And that extends to extending your skill set into learning new toolkits, new languages. On the thumbnail, I tried to cram in as many things as I could think of. Java, JavaScript, Python, Rust, C++, C#, the list goes on. I think it's always valuable to go learn something new. There's stuff that I learned back, in college, that I've been able to take advantage of. Now, some of it was esoteric, like they taught us how sorting algorithms work. Part of that is you needed to kind of understand the algorithm for that. And maybe in a pinch, in a zombie apocalypse, maybe I'm going to need to know how to do, a sorting algorithm. I don't know. But one of the things I learned was compiler construction, how to build parsers and stuff like that. It's not something I use every day, but it's something that I've tapped into 3 or 4 times in my career. It's a skill set that I picked up. And one of the things is, even using the newer Antler, when I had read some of the posts about the guy that had invented Antler, part of his design of that toolkit was so that you didn't have as many hangups as come with the traditional Lex and Yak toolkit that people used back in the dawn of modern day coding. Okay. He had put some thought. He had been guided by some of the stuff in the past. And so I actually could go and appreciate, because I had some of that context, I could appreciate what he'd done. He didn't have to have that to use Antler, but I could see some of the stuff he had done to, there are issues when you're going writing parsers in Lex and Yak that could end up steering you into a blind canyon, which you got to retreat from and deal with. And you need to kind of handbake a solution. he had that awareness and built it into Antler so that you don't have some of the same problems. He just cut off a whole swath of issues in that toolkit. And so, that was awesome. Some of the other stuff is, if you followed me for long, there's something I used to put into my header bio was JavaScript Padawan. We had these teammates several years ago, I guess in the days of Pivotal Software. Um, John Han had dubbed himself JavaScript Barbarian. This was a guy who had long ago had run a consultancy based on JavaScript from 20 years ago. Now, if you've know anything about what's been added to the JavaScript, the language, just in the past 5 to 10 years, try to imagine where JavaScript was 20 years ago. To me, somebody that could run a consultancy that had other people working for him to go and write JavaScript code then was kind of impressive to me. And that was sort of his self descriptor was JavaScript Barbarian. I thought that was hilarious. So it told me the guy probably knew a lot of JavaScript and he was probably savvy with it to be able to, I don't know, confidently take a title like that. So I was wanting to learn more about it, and I realized that was a deep pool. I felt like that's a pool that you can go in. This is the shallow part, and then suddenly you're going down in here, and hey, smash the like button if you've dived into the deep end of JavaScript, and you're sitting there just trying to get back to the surface for a breath of air. So I'm sitting there studying. I felt under his tutelage, and at the same time, we also had another teammate, Brian Cavalier, at the time, who was also an aficionado for JavaScript. And I was studying under these two people, and I dubbed myself a Padawan. I was this pupil, this person who was wanting to learn. It wasn't necessarily what I used for everything in my day job, but I was like, let me try to pick up some of the dribbles and the crumbs from this, see if I can pick it up. So I called myself a JavaScript Padawan. And that was good. I did that for 2 or 3 years working on that. I learned some bits about Node.js, and it's hard to be studying JavaScript and not glean stuff about how CSS and HTML also work. And you find out that there's ways of doing things today compared to 25 years ago, for example, because it's emerged heavily in what you can and can't do with it. And so I learned a lot about that. And that was to me a useful skill set to have acquired. I've never had to go build web pages that depended on JavaScript to save my life, okay? To put food on the table and to feed my family, okay? I don't know if I could do that today. I don't know if I have that much skill set. That's a bit of an accomplishment, but something that I've been working on recently in my new position at Cockroach Labs, which, by the way, I've added new pieces of decor to the set here. My nice water mug from Cockroach Labs. One of the things we had to leverage is we're building some training materials, some for customers and whatnot. And one of the toolkits we're using is Reveal.js. Reveal.js is uber slick and lets you write in various markdown languages, markdown, ASCII doctor, what have you, and then you can render an HTML-based slideshow. So instead of using PowerPoint or Apple, the Mac Keynote toolkit, we're instead using Reveal.js to bake decks with some key content in there. And the underlying thing to build it that they're using is Node.js. So some of the stuff where I've gone and looked at the tooling and I've proposed some changes and stuff. I had to get in there and dig in, find some new JavaScript toolkits to take advantage of. They're using Gulp.js. Anybody heard of that one? To do the generation and packaging and whatnot. And I would be still digging at the bottom of the pile if I hadn't studied the stuff under these two fine gentlemen years ago. So that was a skill set that I don't use it every day, but when I need it, I like being able to reach into the grab bag and grab that. I like being able to have access to that. So this is where I say it doesn't hurt to go it doesn't hurt to go study Java, to go write code for somebody, for a shop in Java. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, if you like it, I'm not saying it's okay. I'm not saying it's you'll get by. I'm saying if you like it, go for it. Do it. There is plenty of opportunities out there for Java developers. They need them. I can remember all the way back to the 2008 spring experience in South Florida. That's what they called the That's what Spring was. The Spring One conference was back in the day. And I was chatting with Rod Johnson, and and it was some article back then. I think it was at the serverside.com. That was an uber popular blogging site back in the day then. And we were chatting about one of these articles that had come out, and his comment was, "It has become popular to criticize Java." Well, I can tell you that was 2008. This is 2024. In the past 16 years, the popularity to criticize Java has not faded. Okay. The irony of that is, like, Java is everywhere. I mean, we're walking into some of the biggest shops around there in our current company, and these people are using. There's people. I'm walking into. I'm not physically walking into companies, because since I've taken this position, I haven't left this area, but we're dealing with customers. Some customers have 40,000 developers, and a huge chunk of them are using Java. So to sit there and be like, Java, pick and choose something if you like it. If you like the appeal of Java, go grab it and use it. I like it. It's awesome. I can affect change with that. Does that mean it's no good to learn Kotlin? No, go learn Kotlin. In my time, one of the other endeavors that I've worked on is I helped build up the Nashville Java user group. And last year I turned it over to a friend of mine to run it from here on, and they've made a smashing reemergence. It kind of petered out with the lockdowns during the COVID pandemic stuff, but they're back in full stream. They've had I can't remember them. They've had several people come visit there. It's great. And in past meetings that I was at, I would talk to application developers. I just had this glimmer in their eye for having picked up Kotlin. They were kind of frustrated with some of the shortcomings of Java, and they found Kotlin could seal the deal and close the gap. And they were like, just for some of these people, the way Kotlin deals with nullability was like, whoa. I've worked on endeavors where I used Groovy in the past, and Groovy has a neat style all of its own. It's not a functional programming per se, but they have some of these constructs that give you the closures and stuff, which I think was inspired by Ruby and their code blocks. So there's neat stuff to learn there. And I feel like anytime I've gone and learned about Java or Groovy or Kotlin, or I've dabbled with Clojure, very, very little, might I add, but each of these things, I kind of learn a new angle on development. And when I come back to some of my favorite stuff, when I come back to some of my favorite work like coding in good old Java 8, and I'm thinking about a Java 8 stream where I'm going to process this and then filter and then map and then go through a transformational pass. I feel like I'm better informed about the different angles to look at stuff. It makes me think of stuff and widen my gaze, and it helps me do stuff. Don Coffin is checking in on the comments here. Good morning, Greg. Well, good morning to you, Don. It's good to see you here. Now, I want to let you know, at any time you can pose your questions in the comments. And by the way, if you happen to be on YouTube and you do a super chat, your question goes to the top of the list. We got some more comments coming in. Here is in India, and mostly here we have .NET and Python. They're used for desktop stuff like tkinter. I've never known how to pronounce that. Tkinter. And I know JavaScript and Python. .NET's massively popular just up the road from me in Nashville. There's a lot of healthcare companies and stuff. They use all kind. There used to be a conference here called the DevLink Conference. It was a .NET based conference, and actually it's where I met the person that helped me form the Nashville Java user group, which is kind of ironic. But I've used Python stuff in the past. Here says he is reading Java Challenger by Rafael De Niro, and he's doing that so that he can learn in-depth and understanding technology. And I say that's the way to go. One of the things that I commented about when I spoke at the Austin Peay State University back in September last year, October, somewhere around there. I went in and talked about, not only is it valuable, this very topic I'm saying, it's okay to learn Java and C++ and Rust and C#. It's okay to go learn these things, to go study them. But it's also of keen value to go and read books. When you go to either university or boot camp program and you complete it, what you're finishing is, you can think of it as sort of, that's your introduction. That's how to just get into the pool. The idea is if you finish a 4-year comp sci program, they've kind of given you some of the basic tools to get going, but that is not the end of your learning experience. Um, when you go to when you finish like a 12-week boot camp or something, they're kind of giving you the fundamentals. A lot of times the boot camps are aimed at, they're giving you the fundamentals to build e-commerce sites. That a lot of them, the ones that I've seen, tend to be heavily tilted towards JavaScript and CSS and HTML. Basically, how to get going with some of these toolkits and get off the ground so you can start building apps and be hired. The idea is to finish the program and get a position somewhere where they're paying you to build web apps. That's a huge change. I had heard on a podcast about a single mom that was striving to make ends meet and then completed a boot camp program and was able to pretty rapidly after that get to six figures. That's an impressive change for a 12-week program, in my opinion. And so that's why I'm like, we need this kind of stuff. We need this support. And so that's what compelled me to sit down and write this article. As a pro coder, it's always valuable to pick up skills, to acquire talents. Is it okay to study Java? Yes. What about, is JavaScript good to learn? Yes. Are there any benefits in learning CSS? Yes, yes, yes. And what I'm going to tell you is just almost always emphatically yes. There's something kind of buried in here, and if you're watching it, you can kind of see I'm highlighting a paragraph. But if you're listening to this on the audio podcast, I'm highlighting the paragraph that talks about there's this phenomena known as the arrival syndrome, and it's something that we all need to fight. And it's this feeling of, I've arrived, I have learned all that there is. Now, and the insidiousness of that is that it says it tells you, don't worry about that. You don't need any more. You've got what you need. There's nothing more to learn. And in a sense, it's kind of sad because at that point, everything is sort of downhill from there. You're hoping to coast on the rest of that. Now, when I throw it out there and call on it that directly, it's easy to say, okay, that does sound ridiculous. That's not me. I don't have that. You need to sit back, and the next time you catch yourself saying, well, I don't need to worry about that. I don't need to worry about that. I don't need to, I think I know the answer here. There's nothing to learn. It can pop up in a sneakier fashion than that. So we need to look out for it. Yeah, I love Java. If anybody comes to me, I'm always going to tell people to go ahead, do Java. I sit there and did it for 14 years. That was my day job when I was on the Spring team, was essentially writing Java code. So I'll say that. You don't need to go learn Python. Okay, I'm not saying that. You don't need Python. You can get Java. Java's good. You don't need any more than that. That's not true. Along the way, I wrote bash scripts. Let me switch off the screen share here. I did things like I've written bash scripts. I had studied different continuous integration systems, CI stuff. I had first learned, there's this one we used called drone.io. I don't know if it's still out there. It was a startup company. It was the first place I had gone to that I saw it. It was the first one I knew about that you could move away from the heavy-handed user interface and instead have a configurable file with all your steps in it for the flow. I think it was a YAML file, but anyway, I don't know if there's a way to vote down if you hate YAML, but anyway, it was the first place I had seen to have that configurable file. And they later added the option to use some of their stuff was clearly they're using Docker containers. And so they had options to say, at this step, I want to use this particular container. And I started getting the hints of maybe containerized CI steps for this solution. But sometimes stuff would break, or the CI flow would break, and the error messaging was kind of lacking. But I remember going to the Spring One conference in Vegas that year, and that was the first year I got to meet Mark Paluk, who's now the team leader for the Spring Data team. And he's the one that tipped me off about Circle CI. And in Circle CI, it looked very similar from a configuration standpoint, but the outputs were a lot better. I could sit there, and when something would break, I got a more clear message. I would get this email saying, here's where the thing broke. And I was like, well, that's miles better than what I used to have. So I moved all the guides that we had, the getting started guides, from Drone over to Circle CI. Now, we later did a couple more evolutions. And we finally ended up going to Jenkins, which Jenkins is one of the things I was trying to get away from. Now I had a taste of arrival syndrome in that I'd already cast my judgment on Jenkins, one of the earliest CI tools that have been in the market. And part of that was because I didn't like Jenkins' UI only approach. But there's a certain time when they'd reached a point where it was an option. You could either configure everything in their web interface, or you could do it all with a pipeline file. And there was a one-time setup in the web page. And I looked at that and I said, it took me a couple months to let go of my preconceptions, to disband my arrival syndrome, and instead say, wait a minute, I think they've got what we need. It's not hard to read like a YAML file. It's actually kind of like, it's a groovy file is what it was a groovy script. And so I could do that. It had parallel tasks. It let me do containers. I could actually bake custom containers as needed for certain steps. And I said, well, this is what we need. And they rehabbed the UI partially. I think there's some faults with the new UI, but it's still, the new UI could show me a nice visual of where things were serial, where things branched into parallel and came together. So I felt at that point, I had learned a bit about lots of different tools. I had learned the drone tool, Circle CI, some other tools, and I learned some of the stuff about what's beneficial overall from a big picture perspective for continuous integration. And that's a skill that I've been accumulating for several years. And it's a knowledge and experience that I'm going to take to the team that I'm on now. I want to provide my inputs there, my experiences there. Sometimes you meet people that have been doing continuous integration for 2 months. They've just getting going and they've just gotten started. And I like to be able to share some of my experience and roll it back. Here's my opinion on it. What's your opinion? Let's go work on this. Let's collaborate. So I think it's useful to pick up skills, even if you're going to learn a skill that you're never going to use again. There's also a chance you're going to pick up a skill that you never use once. What about that? I'm checking. We got some questions here. Somebody commented, Ambu commented, Jenkins, the dinosaur of CI. That is true. Maybe you could say Jenkins has instituted a comeback like Jurassic Park. I don't know. That one, the dinosaurs ate all the people and it was kind of violent, but that turned out okay. The there's other skills that you can pick up that you could say, I'm learning this and I may never write a system using this. Okay. Um, is there any benefit to that? I mean, is there somebody may want to argue with you and say, well, just a second.
If you're enjoying the show, give it a big thumbs up and share it with a friend right now.
There's the thing. There's some tools we can pick up, we can learn them, and somebody may say, "Oh, I'm not talking about the stuff you will. I'm talking about that's a tool you're never going to learn." Is there any value in even learning what that is? There's a tool you're never going to use that. Is there any value learning about it? And I'm going to say, yes, there's never a problem with learning something. Because one thing is we don't live in a vacuum. It's not like somebody builds this tool and it goes by the wayside. Nobody uses it again. It doesn't work like that. Everything that's being built today branches out. It has, some people use stuff, some people don't. This tool then informs another tool or another set of tools. There's like waves of toolkits that emerge, things that happen, changes, updates, influence. And there can be several iterations, or another generation emerges. And this tool, had some bearing on how this works. And you're, picking one of these. And in a sense, the more you can know the history of what happened, how stuff came to be, the bigger picture that you can get, the better you're able to understand the importance of various aspects. Now, that was a very, I don't know, nebulous statement that I just made. What am I talking about? Let me go back to the example that I gave earlier. what I found out the past year, based on when I used the Antler stuff, I used Antler to build the parser for Spring Data JPA to be able to parse JPQL, HQL, and EQL queries. It was in that moment that I learned Antler was driven by the LexYak tool set. It doesn't repeat what they do. They have a particular approach to that. And Antler has a different approach as to how you use it. But the concept, when the developer, I can't remember his name, when he commented about trying to make it usability oriented, that clicked for me because I remember the difficult the kind of the multi-step process you have to go through to use Lex and Yak. You have to write a grammar file. So, in parsing, there's a lexing phase where strings of characters are turned into strings of tokens. Okay. And then there's the grammar phase where strings of tokens are then transformed into strings of rules. And then the rules roll up into what's called an AST, or abstract syntax tree. And it's really a tree structure. So you generated this AST structure that captures all the semantic knowledge of what you just parsed. And then the final step is, what do you get out of that? You then have some kind of thing that transforms that AST into a final product. Now, traditionally, I'm going to transform this Java source code into bytecode that's runnable. That's the outcome, but you can do other stuff with it. You're going to parse an XML file to generate a JSON equivalent, or I'm going to parse this query, so 90% of it's going to be passed through without change, but I'm going to slide in this page, this parameter setting that makes it a pageable based request, that kind of thing. So that is, you can use the LexYak tools, Lex and Yak tools. In fact, I've seen somebody wrap Lex and Yak with a Python library and make it super easy to leverage it. But I had learned about some of these things. It's possible when you're doing descending grammars, you can go down too deep with a grammar and get stuck where you hit a recursion issue, and the grammar gets stuck and can't figure its way out. And part of what this person designed into Antler was cutting those off such that it's a lot harder to make those kind of recursions happen, to better fail and say, hey, looks like you got a recursive situation here, that kind of thing. And so that's where I could go in. I could appreciate that because I dealt with some of that stuff. I battled that kind of stuff when I did parsing. And so this is where, even if from here on, I'm not going to use any more Lex and Yak, instead I'll reach for Antler, I can appreciate what that does for me and the benefit of that. And that's where it pays to always have learned stuff. Now we got a question here from Andar World. And is that a llama for your avatar? Well, the question is, Greg, hello, please tell me what pet projects should a beginner Java programmer do? Well, there's some different stuff. It's part of it is you can go out, I would start with go out and just look for some of the beginner tutorials. Like if you're talking about Java, there's some beginner tutorials you can find. And sometimes you can pick up somebody else's pet project to start from. I know the Spring team has the Pet Clinic app to go in. Can you build that app? It's almost easier to start with somebody else's pet project and make some alterations to it. Can you make tweaks and changes to that thing? I hadn't looked at the Pet Clinic app in a while, but one of the things I did was long ago, I created something called Spring Python, a Spring flavored toolkit that had things like AOP and other stuff. And I made a Pet Clinic version of that, only it was written in Python, for example. So I used something where I didn't have to spend too much time thinking up the metaphor, and said I could borrow somebody else's metaphor. So, and part of, if you play along with that, you may get inspiration. Maybe I can apply it and do this. I'm going to take the Pet Clinic app and add OAuth. I'm not sure that it has OAuth on it. And I want to learn about OAuth. So I'm going to use this and go forward that way. A lot of people I always see this example of doing a to-do type app. There's SaaS tools that help you manage your to-dos and stuff, and you can do teams and stuff. So sometimes people do a to-do type app, and they'll do that kind of thing. And then sometimes, one of the things I wanted to know how to do is a little bit of the OAuth, but I wanted to hook into YouTube because I was making YouTube content. So I actually made an app that would connect with the OAuth libraries, and it would hook into my YouTube channel so I was like, I wanted to get back. Like, can I find the thumbnail in their APIs? Can I find the title and the description and then the link to the video and just put that on a list? So sometimes it's something just simple like that. Like, or I want to hook into Facebook, whatever, and grab 10 posts and display them on a screen with no CSS, insight, no custom styling. Can I figure out how to do something like that? Because to me, that's always a fun skill. Like, okay, I can take my preferred language and toolkit and I can connect to whatever social platform I use and read some of the data. And along the way you learn. Part of what you learn in that skill set is, how do I go read their documentation? Because invariably you're going to have to read their API docs. It's how to do that. And then you're like, okay, now I need to learn the OAuth dance, because if you're going to talk to social media, it forces you to learn OAuth or some part of OAuth. And OAuth is a bit of a beast, and you start to find out every platform you go to is a little different. And that's kind of fun to do there. And it also, if you're going to connect to somebody else's site to fetch data like that, you're going to also learn the phenomena of rate limits, because all these social media sites realized they were getting scanned constantly by Google and whatnot. And so they put rate limits in place to slow you down. And you have to contend with that. So, I'd say pick, something simple, or, start with somebody else's and see what you can do with it. Maybe you can, after you start going on that, you could try some of their stuff, like I mentioned. But part of it is go and try to have some fun with that, and just do little sprints and see how far you can get with it. And one thing I do want to share is that this episode of the Pro Coder Show is sponsored by 12 Rules for Pro Coders. It's still available in pre-order mode. If you go to 12rules.io, you can find some actionable advice to accelerate your career. There's more to coding and being a pro coder than if-then statements and classes and stuff like that. In fact, there's so many lessons that I have learned in my career that I would like you to not do it the hard way, the way I did. Instead, I want to help speed it up for you. So I wrote this book starting about a year ago, and I finally processed the last edits from my editor. And I actually already sent out a this is the pre-release version. Right now it's marked way down. It's on sale and the price has not gone up yet. So you can grab it now and still get a review copy and check it out. And if you've got some opinions on them, you can share them with me. But soon the price is going to we're going to be elevated up to full price, but I'm going to have an ebook. We're eventually going to get to a paperback, and I'm going to have an audio version you can also buy at discount, as well as I'm going to make a video version, and that is also massively discounted. So check it out. Go to 12rules.io and find out what your professor or instructor didn't have time to cover. Now, let's see here. Now, one of the other things, the reasons why it's always valuable to go be learning new stuff, to go acquiring skills, to accumulating knowledge about stuff, is the fact that what are we facing today? There's new AI toolkits out there. There's new stuff. There's something I talked about here is in today's searchable / AI empowered world, we're reaching out to some of these tools to help us get out of the ditch. We're going to Chat GPT and saying, well, I've here, Chat GPT, I wrote this code. Something is not going right. And I can't see where the problem is. And so we're like bouncing an idea off Chat GPT. If you've done that at least once, and be honest, put it in the comments. So we're going to Chat GPT and trying to bounce the idea off it and get some feedback back. Well, as soon as Chat GPT gives you an answer, you have to figure out whether what it said it's true or it's absolute rubbish. We need to do, and what does it take to be able to figure that out? You need to be able to, you need to know where in the ref docs if that's true. Sometimes it's obvious if it's wrong, and sometimes it's not so obvious. I was searching for one thing, and I needed an answer, not a piece of code, but I was looking for a configuration option in ASCII Doctor. And I was just like, well, I dug around, I didn't see it anywhere. So I just pinged Chat GPT and said, does it support it? And it said, yes. And I said, give me the link to where you got that. Because I'm like, Chat GPT, show your homework. It gave me a link. I went to it. It wasn't there. I did some digging around. Like maybe maybe it was there and they took it away. What's the deal? I dug around in the version history for that documentation. Nowhere in the version history. I finally deduced that actually it had never existed. And I went back and I told Chat GPT that. I don't know. Maybe I can steer the robot overlords in the future and to say don't share this opinion with anybody else. But I said that what you just told me was absolutely incorrect. And it goes, and with instant response time, it said, "Oh yeah, you're right. This is the land we live in. If you're going to be a pro coder, you're going to have to battle the fact that people are going to be going out and finding answers and putting them into systems that may be wrong, and you need to find that out." So, all right. Oh, Don says, I have received my pre-publication version of 12 Rules for Pro Coders today! Exclamation mark. Awesome. So, and our world is a follow-up question. Thanks for answering the previous question. Can you tell me what you think a junior Java developer should be able to do in order to get a job and cope with it? Well, there's a sliding set of standards, Andar. I'm going to assume that's your name, if that's all right by you. There's a sliding standard of expectations. If you're like maybe you're fresh out of college or something, if you've just graduated and somebody's hiring you as a proverbial new grad or a newbie, you said junior developer, so you're pretty fresh. There's less expectation on how much do you know. They're not thinking, can you sit down and build a YouTube OAuth client and style it and make it look all fancy, or like kind of what I was talking about a little bit. They're not as much looking for that as they're looking for, do you have the fundamentals? Do you know what a class is? Do you know what public and private methods are? Do you know how to code something? You may have worked on something. I had to do this thing when I was in college called a senior design project, where I had to work with two other people and we had to build something together. And I've talked to other people on this front, and one of the biggest lessons I learned in the senior design project space is that one of the three people will be lazy and just not do their portion. And so it's sort of a joint grade, and so you can't walk in with nothing. So the other two people have to learn to compensate for the third person. Okay, that's kind of a jaded perspective, but that was one of the things I learned about it. Sometimes you have to go a little above and beyond to pull not just your weight, but somebody else's. So there's an element of, they're looking for somebody that's ready to learn, is open to stuff. You may be, some of the shops you could walk into they may use Spring. So you may need to be ready to learn Spring. So, it's handy to go buy some of these books out there to study up on that. You could walk into another shop that does not use Spring and says using Jakarta EE. So some of it's to be looking for, people may be open. If you're more seasoned, for example, I just jumped to Cockroach Labs here the last month as my new position since I got cut in the acquisition of Broadcom by Broadcom. So I've been in the industry for 27 years. So what they're expecting from me is not what they're expecting from you, is what I'm trying to say. Now there's a video on the channel. I can see you're coming from YouTube. If you go over to the YouTube channel, one of my more recent videos was about how do you interview for a position in the midst of a struggling economy. And there's some tips there on how to affect change. And what's kind of buried in that video as part of it is to go and do a little research on yourself and capture it. Like, what are some lessons what are some things that you've worked on? And I called them stars: situation, task, action, and results. What's a problem a situation you found yourself in? What task items did you identify? What actions did you take in that? And what were the final results? So instead of just going to a shop and thinking, well, they're probably looking for somebody who knows Vue.js or React.js. I don't know what toolkits they're using. I know React.js, but they're looking for Vue.js. So they turn you down. Well, if all you walk in with is thinking, I'm going to share the tech stack I know, and it's thumbs up or thumbs down, it's more subtle than that. They're looking for people that can solve problems. Oftentimes, the tech stack is not as high of a priority in that context. Somebody who knows React.js can, I'm pretty sure, pick up Vue.js relatively quickly. So if you walk in with an attitude to an interview and think, here's a problem I solved using React.js. Now the focus is on, this is my problem solving talent set, and this is the technology I used to affect that change. They're going to say, well, if they can do all that, what's to say they can't swap out React for Vue.js, for example? And so this is where I'd say, if you've like, what kind of Java apps have you built till now? Try to make a list. What was the context that you were using that in, so that you make it more a story, a conversation, instead of just a checkbox or a set of bullet points. And so that's my suggestion, is to try to look for that. I've seen different. There's some companies I knew of that focus on hiring seasoned people. I can't comment today on what the spring team is looking for necessarily, but back in the days when it was a startup, they had made a strategic decision to hire A-level developers. This is back in like 2006 or something. Keith Donald, you can find videos of Keith Donald sharing this on YouTube, but they were looking for A-list developers. So people, for example, that had been consultants already and working in the field in Java, were people that they knew they could hire and probably affect rapid change, for example. So a junior developer, that would not have been a good fit in the early days like that. But a company I worked at long ago, back, at least back in the day, they had pipelines into certain key universities. They had people going to University of Florida and Florida State University and some other places, and they were hiring junior developers right out of college. Okay. So it could be a whole difference in what company you're interviewing with as to what they're looking for. Okay. So I don't know if that really answers your question about, what are they looking for, but I go to the channel and check out that video, because there's some gold in there about how to try to make it not just a checkbox bullet set of items that you're trying to get to get a position. And I mean, I know it's tough out there. I agree. I've chatted with several friends and colleagues and stuff, and the market's kind of rough right now. So, I mean, I want to be encouraging and supportive to say, try, do your best, and you may have to do a lot of interviewing in this industry, at least for now. And one thing I didn't know, if I didn't, you may not know it, but there's actually a podcast version of this show you can catch. If you go to podcast.procoder.io, I release this. It goes to all kinds of places: Apple Podcast, Spotify. Spotify is now host podcasts, so you can catch it there too. It goes to all kinds of places. So check it out. And what do we got here? We need to get a drink here.
If you're enjoying the show, give it a big thumbs up and share it with a friend right now.
Now, I want to thank everybody for turning out for today's episode of the Pro Coder Show. And if you ever have any questions that you want to hear answered on the air, go to procoder.io/question, and you can pose it there. And we just might answer your question in a future episode. So I encourage all of y'all to go out there and be professional.
This episode is over, but your code writing journey continues. Visit procoder.io to find links and resources to help you become a pro coder.